Hello, dear friends, and welcome back to Roomorphosis. If you're joining us for the first time, I'm so glad you found your way here. Today, we're stepping away from the modern world and into something truly magical, the time-worn beauty of a vintage cottage dressed for autumn. Picture this, a countryside retreat where every object tells a story, where imperfection is celebrated, and where the changing season feels less like decoration and more like coming home. If this speaks to your soul, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe and join our community of kindred spirits who believe that the most beautiful spaces are those touched by time and filled with heart. Before we dive into specifics, let's talk about what makes cottage style so endlessly captivating. This isn't about pristine perfection or carefully matched sets. Cottage style celebrates the beauty of wear, paint that's gently flaking, wood that's honestly weathered, fabrics softened by countless washings. It's about pieces collected over time, inherited from grandmothers, discovered at countryside estate sales, or rescued from forgotten barns. Autumn in a cottage isn't decorated. It's lived, gathered, and lovingly arranged. Every element should feel as though it's earned its place through use, memory, or the simple fact that it brings joy. In any cottage, the fireplace reigns supreme, and autumn gives us permission to celebrate it fully. Begin with your mantelpiece as the room's beating heart. Forget symmetry. Instead, create an organic collection that builds naturally. On one side, stack weathered leather-bound books tied with twine. Nestle in an aged brass candlestick, its patina telling decades of stories. Add a small oxidized mirror that's lost some of its silvering, perhaps a collection of ironstone pitchers in varying heights, or a worn wooden bread bowl filled with real walnuts still in their shells. Drape a length of vintage grain sack fabric casually across one corner. Tuck in dried hydrangeas that have faded to that perfect dusty mauve. And here's a cottage essential. Your firewood becomes part of the decor. Stack it in an old galvanized bucket, a weathered wooden crate, or a vintage wire basket. The sight of ready fuel speaks to comfort and preparedness in the most visceral way. The cottage kitchen is where vintage style truly shines. Embrace open shelving if you can. It's historically accurate and utterly charming. Display your mismatched collection of transferware, ironstone, and depression glass without apology. The beauty lies in the variety. Hang copper pots and pans from a vintage ladder mounted horizontally, or from salvaged hooks along a beam. Bring out your collection of enamelware. Those chipped coffee pots and speckled bowls aren't flawed, they're perfect. Fill glass canisters and vintage apothecary jars with autumn staples, dried beans, pasta, whole spices. The visual abundance speaks to harvest and plenty. Your farmhouse table becomes a working surface and gathering place. Leave a worn cutting board out with a few perfect apples. Set a stoneware crock with wooden spoons where you can reach them. Drape a flour sack towel over the back of a mismatched chair. These aren't styled moments. They're the beautiful evidence of a kitchen actively loved and used. Textiles in a cottage tell generational stories. Seek out genuine vintage quilts and coverlets, the hand-stitched kind with slight irregularities that prove human hands created them. Don't worry about perfect condition. A few thin spots or faded patches only add authenticity. Layer these treasures freely, a faded quilt as a tablecloth, another folded at the foot of your bed, a third draped over a ladder displayed against the wall. Introduce lengths of antique linen, the heavy, slubby kind that feels substantial in your hands. Use them as table runners, casual window treatments, or simple draped accents over chairs. European grain sacks with their original lettering make stunning pillow covers or table runners. Hunt for vintage lace curtain panels. Even if they're slightly yellowed or fragile, they filter autumn light in the most ethereal way. And don't overlook wool. Tartan blankets, cable knit throws that are genuinely worn soft, even an old wool coat repurposed as a cushion cover. Your cottage porch or entryway sets the stage for everything within. This is where rusticity can truly flourish. Begin with a weathered wooden bench, the kind with peeling paint and honest wear. Top it with a faded cushion and a tartan blanket for chilly evening sitting. Create your wreath from what nature provides. Grapevine base adorned with dried hydrangeas, rose hips, bittersweet berries, pheasant feathers, and perhaps a few small lady apples wired in place. Hang it from a vintage hook or salvaged barn hardware. Cluster various sizes of old lanterns, the more rust and patina, the better. Fill them with battery-operated candles for safety, or real pillars if you're vigilant. Line up vintage rubber boots or galvanized buckets filled with seasonal branches, curly willow, bittersweet, or berry-laden stems cut from your own rambles. A stack of old wooden crates can hold pumpkins and gourds in heirloom varieties, the warty, multicolored, genuinely odd ones that look like they came from a heritage farm. Add a corn broom with a naturally weathered handle, perhaps a galvanized watering can, and a basket for gathering. Your entrance should whisper of countryside rhythms and simpler times. Lighting in a vintage cottage should feel as though electricity was an afterthought. Seek out reproduction oil lamps or actual antique ones converted for safety. The amber glow through vintage glass globes creates unmatched warmth. Hang an industrial-style pendant light over your dining table, something with an aged metal shade and visible bulb. Wall sconces should look salvaged, wrought iron with candle sleeves, or simple metal arms with Edison bulbs. Cluster mismatched brass candlesticks of various heights on surfaces throughout your cottage. Fill them with ivory or beeswax tapers that drip naturally. Battery-operated string lights with vintage-style bulbs can be draped along beams or woven through displayed branches, but keep them warm-toned and subtle. The goal is layers of gentle, golden light that could have existed a century ago, creating pools of warmth that invite gathering. One of cottage style's most appealing elements is the visible abundance of preserved harvest. Create this even if you're not actually canning. Line open shelves with vintage mason jars filled with colourful layers: dried beans, lentils, pasta, popcorn kernels. Add a few jars of homemade preserves if you make them, or beautiful store-bought versions in traditional jars. Hang bundles of dried herbs from a wooden drying rack or simple hooks. sage, thyme, oregano, bay leaves. Their muted greens and greys are quintessentially autumnal. Display heirloom pumpkins and squash varieties on tiered stands, in dough bowls, or simply lined along windowsills. Choose the interesting ones: warty gourds, blue hubbards, fairy tale pumpkins, striped cushaws. Fill wire baskets with real apples and pears, accepting that they'll need refreshing but loving their authentic presence. Hang an old wire egg basket filled with nuts in shells. This visible plenty creates a deeply satisfying sense of preparedness and connection to seasons past. Cottage walls should feel curated over generations, never purchased in a single shopping trip. Create a gallery wall with truly mismatched frames, some ornate gold, others simple wood, perhaps a few painted and distressed. Inside, mix vintage botanical prints, old family photos, they don't have to be your family, watercolor landscapes and pressed flowers in antique frames. Hang a collection of vintage plates in various patterns and sizes, using plate hangers that show their age. Mount antique mirrors with spotted, silvering and decorative frames at unexpected heights. Display old enamel advertising signs for seed companies or vintage provisions. Hang a wooden dough bowl or cutting board collection. Install vintage hooks and hang copper molds, enamelware cups, or small wire baskets. The wall becomes an ever-evolving display of discovered treasures rather than a designed statement. Cottage furniture should never match. Instead, it should all share a similar spirit of age and honest wear. Your dining table might be a scarred farm table with layers of paint history showing at the edges. Surround it with completely different chairs, perhaps two with ladder backs, one Windsor, one with arms, all in slightly different finishes. This isn't chaos, it's the natural accumulation of life. A painted cupboard with crackling finish becomes both storage and focal point. Display dishes behind wavy antique glass doors and style the top with stacked ironstone and crockery. Use an old trunk as a coffee table, its worn leather straps and travel stickers speaking of journeys taken. A weathered stepladder becomes a plant stand or display for folded linens. A church pew offers seating with built-in character. Hunt for pieces that show authentic wear rather than manufactured distressing. The real thing has an unmistakable quality that your eye can sense, even if you can't articulate why. Every cottage needs a place for quiet contemplation that feels genuinely lived in. Position a worn, upholstered chair near a window, the kind that's been recovered once or twice, and now bears the comfortable dips and sags of decades of readers. If you find a Victorian tufted chair with some stuffing showing, even better. Drape it with a Scottish wool blanket or faded quilt. Place a small vintage table within reach, perhaps one with slightly wobbly legs that's been braced with a folded matchbook. Top it with a hammered brass lamp, a small stack of cloth-bound books with gilt lettering, and a teacup on a mismatched saucer. Nearby, keep a basket filled with more books, yarn if you knit, or needlework in progress. Add a pettit point footstool or a needlepoint pillow. This corner shouldn't look staged, it should look interrupted, as though you just stepped away and plan to return with fresh tea. Cottage florals are never formal. Forget florist arrangements and embrace what feels gathered from countryside rambles. Fill vintage pitchers, enamel coffee pots, or small galvanized buckets with wildly informal bundles. Branches cut from apple trees, with a few leaves still clinging, and perhaps a late apple or two. Clusters of dried hydrangeas in faded blues and mauves. Tall stems of ornamental grasses gone to seed. Rose hips on thorny branches. Bittersweet vine with its orange berries just splitting. Bring in what autumn actually provides, not what you think autumn should look like. Arrange these casually, even haphazardly. Overflowing is good. Perfectly balanced is wrong. Place arrangements in unexpected spots. On stair landings, windowsills, bathroom counters, even the kitchen table. Mix in found elements like interesting seed pods, birds' nests, or beautiful fallen leaves tucked into the containers. This approach costs almost nothing, but delivers authentic cottage charm that money cannot buy. Cottage table settings embrace delightful mismatch. Begin with your base layer, perhaps a faded floral tablecloth with a few darned spots, or a simple linen runner in natural fibre. Your plates should be collected, not matched. English transferware in blue and white, ironstone in cream, perhaps one hand-painted floral plate. Different patterns at every place setting isn't wrong, it's charming. Add vintage silverware, the kind with worn monograms from someone else's family. Mix in different glassware, old jelly jars, cut crystal from different sets, vintage wine glasses with twisted stems. For napkins, use old linen dish towels, vintage handkerchiefs, or actual cloth napkins in different patterns tied with twine. Your centerpiece keeps the same gathered sensibility. A wooden dough bowl filled with gourds and nuts, surrounded by brass candlesticks of varying heights with ivory tapers. Tuck in a few stems of bittersweet or dried hydrangea. This table says, "Come sit, be comfortable," rather than "Be careful, this is precious." The cottage garden and cottage interior should blur together in autumn. Fill an old zinc watering can with branches of crabapple or hawthorn berries. Arrange ornamental cabbages and kale in a weathered wooden trug or vintage enamel basin. Place small potted mums in mismatched terracotta pots with naturally developed patina down the center of your table. Hang dried lavender bundles tied with faded ribbon from cabinet knobs or wall hooks. Fill antique wire egg baskets with lady apples or seckel pears. Use vintage garden tools as decor, a worn trowel holding place cards, old terracotta pots stacked artfully, a weathered garden sieve as a wall hanging. This dissolving of the boundary between outside and inside is quintessentially cottage. These spaces have always worked together, and autumn is the season when the garden comes inside for safekeeping. The most authentic cottage pieces are often those that served real rural purposes. Vintage garden tools with worn wooden handles can lean artfully in corners or hang from walls. Stack old wooden crates as impromptu shelving, their faded produce labels showing. Use galvanized milk cans as umbrella stands or simply as sculptural elements. Hang a vintage wooden ladder horizontally to display quilts, or lean one against a wall with baskets hanging from its rungs. Collect various sizes of woven baskets, for firewood, for displaying gourds, for corralling magazines. An old wooden step stool serves as a side table or plant stand. Wire egg baskets hold everything from fruit to balls of twine. These pieces ground your cottage in authenticity because they reference real country living rather than imagining it. Fragrance in a cottage should never come from synthetic candles labelled autumn spice. Instead, create authentic aromas through living. Bake an apple pie and let that cinnamon and butter scent permeate your rooms. Simmer apple peels with cinnamon sticks and whole cloves on your stovetop. If you have a working fireplace, the smell of burning hardwood, oak, maple, cherry, is autumn's truest scent. Hang bundles of dried lavender from your cottage for subtle herbal notes. Fill small linen sachets with rose petals and lavender from summer's garden and tuck them in drawers. Place bowls of whole cloves, cinnamon sticks, and dried orange slices around your cottage. Brew strong tea and let the bergamot linger. These honest scents cost little but create powerful sense memories that transport you instantly to countryside autumns past. Your sleeping space should feel like a sanctuary from another era. An iron bed frame, whether painted white with chips showing or left in black with rust accents, establishes immediate vintage credibility. Dress it in layers that invite burrowing. A vintage sheet in faded floral, a lightweight quilt, then a heavier coverlet topped with a wool blanket folded at the foot. Pile pillows in various sizes with mismatched cases, some vintage embroidered, some simple white cotton, one in faded ticking stripe. Flank your bed with different nightstands, perhaps a small painted table on one side and a stack of vintage suitcases on the other. Top them with mismatched lamps, one with a pleated silk shade, another with milk glass base. Keep a white ironstone pitcher and basin as decorative elements. Hang a simple muslin or lace curtain that filters morning light. This room should feel like stepping into a nostalgic dream. While cottage style is primarily soft and romantic, strategic industrial elements add authenticity and edge. Vintage factory pendants with enamel shades work beautifully over kitchen islands or dining tables. Exposed plumbing fixtures in weathered brass or aged copper feel period appropriate in kitchens and baths. An old school clock with Roman numerals and aged face brings both function and character. Metal storage pieces, vintage lockers, steel bins, wire baskets provide contrast to softer elements. Use galvanized metal freely, buckets, tubs, watering cans, troughs. Their zinc patina and honest wear complement cottage softness. These touches reference the practical side of country life when beauty and function were inseparable. Here's what matters most. Your cottage decor should enable autumn living, not just autumn looking. Use that farmhouse table for making preserves or rolling out pie dough, letting flower dust settle into its grooves. Light those candles every evening, letting wax drip naturally. Actually sit in your reading nook with tea and a book, letting the pages fall open where they will. Wear those wool blankets thin with use. Burn wood in that fireplace and let ash dust the hearth. Hang your jackets on those vintage hooks and let your boots dry by the door. Cook soups that simmer for hours, filling your cottage with honest scent. Gather actual apples and watch them slowly wrinkle in their bowl. The beauty of cottage style is that it improves with use, that every sign of living adds to rather than detracts from its charm. This isn't a museum or a magazine spread. It's a life, vintage in its rhythms and generous in its welcome. And there you have it, friends, the art of creating an autumn cottage that feels genuinely vintage, beautifully rustic, and warmly lived in. Remember, the most important ingredient isn't found in any shop. It's the willingness to embrace imperfection, to value history, and to create spaces that honor both memory and moment. I hope these ideas inspire you to seek out treasures with stories, to arrange them with love rather than precision, and to live fully in the beautiful spaces you create. I'd be truly delighted to see your cottage transformations, so please share photos in the comments below. If today's journey into cottage autumn spoke to you, give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who appreciates the beauty of things worn gentle by time. Subscribe to Roomorphosis for more explorations of timeless design. Until we meet again, embrace the imperfect, honor the old, and live beautifully.